Hi, welcome to a special virtual presentation of the 2021 London Swine Conference. I'm Teresa Van Ray, your LSC chair and a very proud pork producer from Huron County. Last year, we marked our 20th conference. Since 2001, the London Swine Conference has helped connect producers, researchers, industry, and policymakers across our pork sector. It's an important opportunity to share science-based information that helps each of us do our part to make our businesses and industry stronger. So we all know that chatting with each other face to face and having that cup of Java, the odd glass of hops, or fermented grapes, my favorite, it's such a huge part of learning from each other and, well, a lot of fun. Remember, fun? Not sure about you, but I've not exactly felt in control of a lot in my life lately. However, knowledge is power. Knowledge can help us gain back some of the control we all need to have success. While we aren't able to gather this year in person, we are excited to bring you a series of live and on-demand presentations from people at the top of their fields. We are one of the many phenomenal industries that have continued to produce food for the world throughout this past year. For that, thanks to each and every one of you and your families. So, sit back. We invite you to enjoy this virtual presentation. And I, for one, look so forward to seeing each and every one of you face to face and celebrating with you in 2022.
Hello, everyone. My name is Terry OSullivan, and I am a member of the London Swine Conference Organizing Committee. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this presentation of the on-demand video series. Joining us today is Dr. Denise Beaulieu, who is an assistant professor at the University of Saskatchewan, where she conducts applied swine research focused on nutrition. Denise, she received her BSA and her MSc degrees from the University of Saskatchewan at College of Agriculture, and a PhD in dairy cattle nutrition, nutrition and lactation from the Ohio State University. And so, thank you, Denise, for presenting today. And before I hand it over to you, I just would like to thank our sponsors for supporting the conference this year, because without the support of our sponsors, we wouldn't have such a successful conference. So thank you once again for your support. And over to you, Denise.
Greetings. I am Denise Beaulieu from the University of Saskatchewan. I would like to thank the organizers of the London Swine Conference for the invitation to speak today. And the topic I was asked to speak on is, can Eastern pigs be fed Western diets? Or rebalancing rations in the era of corn rootworm? I think we'll all agree that the answer to this question is obviously yes. However, the objective of this talk is to provide swine producers with information that they might require to gain confidence in utilizing alternative ingredients, especially wheat, in swine rations. The problem is, I'm not an agronomist, but I've been told this corn rootworm, which is damaging the corn crops. And a solution is to increase different crop rotations, especially wheat. Wheat grown in Ontario is primarily Canadian Eastern soft red winter wheat, as shown here in all of the green circles in this map of Southern Ontario. This is the summary data looking at soft red winter wheat compared to hard red winter wheat and soft white winter wheat from 2020. As you can see, the test weight in kilograms per hectoliter, or commonly called bushel weight, was slightly lower in soft red winter wheat compared to hard red winter wheat, and very similar to soft white winter wheat. The difference is the protein content. The protein content of soft red winter wheat, about 9 to 10%, is lower than that of hard red winter wheat, which is about 11.5 to 12.5%. However, most of us will be using feed wheat in our rations. So let's look at some of the quality characteristics that define feed wheat. Here we're comparing specifically Canadian Eastern feed wheat to Eastern soft red winter wheat, number 1. The minimum test weight for feed wheat is 65 compared to 76 for number 1. Feed wheat can be any variety except durum, whereas the defined number 1 is Eastern soft red winter wheat. Feed wheat can be immature, it can be weather damaged compared to number 1, which has to be reasonably, they call it matured, and free from damaged kernels. Importantly, the percentage of ergot and mycotoxins can vary considerably. Ergot can be 0.1% in feed wheat compared to 0.04 in number 1. Sclerotinia, which is evidence of ergot contamination, 0.25 compared to 0.04. Fusarium damage, which is evidence of deoxynivalenol contamination, can be 5% in feed wheat versus 1% in number 1. Feed wheat can contain up to 10% foreign material, less than 1% in number 1. 2.5% of it can be heated or moldy. No limit on shrunken kernels. 50% of the kernels can be broken, and no limit on the percent sprouted kernels. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using feed wheat, but we definitely have to be aware of some of the differences between feed wheat and number 1, and it should be priced accordingly. We'll also be able to use some of the co-products from wheat milling. This comes from the CFIA definitions of these co-products. And I'll caution you that some agents, or you may talk to some people, and they will be using different names for some of these co-products. So it can be a little bit confusing. Hard red wheat has about 2.5% crude fiber. The CF here is crude fiber. Going from less than 1% to up to 9.5% crude fiber, we have different co-products. Something they call tail of the mill, which I've never seen used, is less than 1%. So it would be concentrated, maybe taking some of the wheat germ. Wheat middlings is lower than crude fiber than, for example, something like wheat mill rud. A lot of the American documents, you'll see something called wheat red dog. It's my understanding this is quite similar to middlings. We want to have some way when we're buying this wheat to estimate feed quality. And the easiest, of course, would be bushel weight. Here you can see an experiment that was done. This is actually Irish work, looking at low and high density wheat. The low wheat contained about 66 or 53 pounds per bushel. The high was 73.5 kilograms per hectoliter, or about 60 pounds per bushel. Diets were formulated with 50% wheat inclusion and fed to 12 kilogram pigs, so fairly young pigs. As you can see, average daily gain was increased with the high density wheat. No effect on feed intake, and thus there was a significant effect on gain per feed. So feed efficiency was reduced in the low hectoliter weight wheat. So the low bushel wheat had a negative effect on feed efficiency. This is primarily due to a decrease in the energy content of this wheat. However, in the discussion, the authors note that the low hectoliter wheat, so the low density wheat, while it had reduced content of gross energy, it also had low crude protein and lysine content. And this is important, it also had higher levels of mycotoxins. So it's really difficult to determine if these differences are due to mycotoxin contamination or due to differences in density, or both. And the authors conclude that hectoliter weight combined with chemical and mycotoxin analysis can be used as a predictor of wheat quality. Some older work that was done at the Prairie Swine Center in Saskatchewan, Ruud Zylstra's group, and what they did was they collected 14 wheat samples, and 12 of these were actually frost damage. He specifically collected these samples to get a range in density. They went from about 58 to 78 kilograms per hectoliter. And then he did a series of analysis to see if he could predict the DE content of this wheat. And it was actually a xylose. A xylose is a type of sugar. The xylose content had the highest correlation with DE, an R squared of 0.61. Density, so the kilograms per hectoliter, correlated with DE only at an R squared of 0.43. So in this experiment, density did not predict DE. So in conclusion, density is not really a good predictor of energy content, but it can certainly be used as an indication of other potential quality factors. So it is one thing that we can have in our toolbox. This comes from a document that I found from actually OMAFRA. So this is Ontario data looking at recommended maximum inclusion rates of cereal grains for pigs. And I put this up here because I would certainly have no problems with these estimations. In what I have read, 45 to 50% is typical for starter pigs for a maximum inclusion, and no problems going up to 95% in grow finish pigs, late grow finish, up to 90% in gestation. You want lower levels in lactation because our lactation diets require a higher energy content. I'd like you to note the comparative value of wheat versus corn. Wheat is actually a higher value than corn. And why is this so? Well, if you look at the nutritive content, as noted, the energy content of wheat is less than corn, about 200 kcals of net energy. So that's significant. However, wheat is higher in crude protein. Specifically, it's higher in lysine, which is normally the first limiting amino acid in our diets. And also notice how much higher it is in standardized total tract digestible phosphorus. This is a way of estimating available phosphorus. So because of this, we could reduce the monodical or inorganic phosphorus in our diets, and we can perhaps reduce the use of things like phytase enzymes in our diets, so reduce costs that way. We often get asked about processing. How should I process the wheat? What particle sizes should I be processing it to? Here's some work that was done at Illinois, looking at hard red winter wheat compared to soft white winter wheat. And they processed these to get particle sizes going from 700 to about 250 with both wheat classes. They did this using screen sizes of about 6.4 down to 1 for the red winter wheat, and 6.4 down to 1.5 for the white winter wheat. And here you can see the screen numbers, if that makes more sense to you. When they looked at these, as expected, as decreased particle size, there was a decrease in bulk density. And when they incorporated these wheats into diets, 78 to 89% in the diets, pellet durability index improved as particle size decreased. And notice this improvement was greater with the hard red winter wheat than the soft white winter wheat, and that the red winter wheat had a much better quality of pellet. When they fed these two diets to pigs going from 43 kilograms of barley weight to market, and I put this up just to remind you of the various particle sizes, it was very interesting. They found an improvement in average daily gain in feed intake with the red winter wheat compared to the soft winter wheat, regardless of particle size. Reducing particle size of the wheat improved average daily gain and feed efficiency when these diets were fed in meal form. However, there was no effect of going from a particle size of about 680 down to 250 when the diets were pelleted. So we can conclude that if we're feeding our diets in meal form, we want to grind them very fine. I wouldn't recommend going down to like 250, but we may want to consider going down to maybe 500 microns. If we're going to feed them in a pelleted form, we don't have to grind them as finely. The pelleting reduces the particle sizes sufficiently. How about the use of enzymes? Can we use enzymes to increase the energy content of wheat? Here's an experiment, again, that was done at the University of Illinois. They fed corn, soybean meal diets, corn, soybean meal with distillers, a wheat, soybean meal diet, and a wheat, soybean meal, and wheat middling based diets. They allowed the net energy content to decrease as they added the wheat-based ingredients to these diets. You can see a dramatic increase in total dietary fiber with the addition of the distillers dry grains and the wheat middlings to the wheat-based diet. They divided these diets into 3, and they added either no enzyme or 2 different xylanase preparations. And xylanase is a type of carbohydrate. And notably, they added these enzymes at 4 times the manufacturer's concentration. So enzyme amount would not be limiting response. And then they measured the effective enzyme on DE content of these diets. You can see in the corn-based diets, whether it was corn, soybean meal, or corn distillers, no effective enzyme. The no enzyme diet is in the black, xylanase A and xylanase B in the 2 shades of green. The wheat, soybean meal diet and the wheat middling diet, we do see a response of an increase in DE with the addition of the xylanase enzymes to the diet. And also note that we see a difference in response between xylanase A and xylanase B. Xylanase, here you can see the xylanase improved digestibility of dietary fiber in wheat, but not corn-based diets. And I conclude that xylanase A and B, they're from different preparations and they had different activity. So what can we conclude from this and a lot of other work about the use of carbohydrates? There is a potential for carbohydrates to improve the digestibility of wheat-based diets. An improvement in digestibility has not always been accompanied by an improvement in performance, and the effect of these carbohydrates is inconsistent. So when I say potential, I guess I would say that we probably need some additional research in this area. Coming back, looking at diets based on wheat for growing swine, I would like to show you now some examples of some wheat-based swine diets. I got these prices from Dr. Laura Eastwood, the OMAF for swine representative in Ontario. And as you can see, ingredient cost right now it's definitely not typical. When you can buy corn at less than corn distillers and wheat mids are the same price of wheat, this makes formulating diets a challenge. So I used these ingredient costs as a starting point, but then I forced in some of the byproducts because with these prices, they wouldn't normally come in. I would say that these prices are not typical of what we normally see. So here you can see some examples of wheat-based diets formulated for young piglets, 10 to 25 kilograms body weight. And I based my requirements on the NRC 2012. Number 1 is a corn-based diet, corn, soybean meal. 2, 3, and 4 are different types of wheat-based diets. Number 2 is a typical wheat, soybean meal diet. I allowed corn distillers to come in and some wheat mids. Number 3, I allowed barley to come in. And number 4, I allowed corn to come back in, but I limited it to 15%. That reduced the content of wheat slightly. Soybean meal came in at 21% and corn distillers at 10%. In this diet, oat groats also came in, and this would be to increase the energy content of the diet. So this just shows you some of the different types of formulations that are possible. All of these diets were formulated to be comparable in net energy and to have the same amino acid content based on standardized ilio-digestible amino acids. Now let's look at, for the older pigs, from 75 to 100 kilograms body weight. The numbers 1 and 2 are corn-based. Number 1 is corn with corn distillers. Number 2 is corn, soybean meal-based diets. Number 3 and 4 are wheat-based. Number 3 has a high level of wheat, 87% wheat, with about 10% corn distillers. Number 4, I allowed soybean meal to come back in, again with 10% distillers. The difference between 3 and 4 is primarily whether you would have the ability to use synthetic amino acids in your production plant. Some on-farm feed producers may not be able to have an inventory or use synthetic amino acids. So you could add soybean meal to a grow finished diet, and you don't have to use any synthetic amino acids. The soybean meal has sufficient. Or you can take soybean meal right out of the diet and just add some lysine and a little bit of threonine to your diet, and the amino acids will be balanced. This is an example of some work that we recently did at the Prairie Swine Center, where we were looking at the addition of 30% wheat meal run in grow finished diets. So very simply, we had wheat at about 46%, and we replaced 30% of that wheat with wheat meal run. Diets were balanced based on the standardized ileodigestible lysine to net energy ratio. And as we increased the wheat meal run, we allowed the energy content of the diets to decrease. The DE content, as we determined, was 3.5 to about 3.3, so about 200 kcals of DE difference. And so based upon this DE, we calculated a net energy of about 2.5, going down to 2.34. When we fed these diets to finishing pigs, you can see that the addition of the meal run here, average daily gain, it did reduce average daily gain. There was no significant effect of the meal run on feed intake. Thus, as we would expect, because of the reduced energy content, we saw a decrease in feed efficiency. I will note here that we did have a carbohydrates enzyme in half of these diets. We saw no effect of the enzyme on performance in this experiment. So whether this reduction in feed efficiency going from 0.39 to 0.37 would improve profitability would depend, of course, on the potential cost savings of adding 30% wheat meal run to the diets. Certainly in the current pricing situation, where we don't see a discount for these co-products, this would not make sense. However, if these co-products decrease in price, dollars per kilogram may actually make it profitable to include these co-products in our diet. It would entirely depend on the cost of the meal run versus wheat, but it is an option. One thing I just want to touch upon quickly is, because we do get questions about this, if we're changing diets dramatically, is what about pork quality? The reason that we would be concerned about this is corn has about 3.5% ether extract, wheat about 2%. And ether extract is a measure of the fat content of the grain. Also, as you can see, the fatty acid composition varies dramatically between corn and wheat. Corn has a much higher level of polyunsaturated fatty acids relative to wheat. So we could expect that substituting wheat for corn would give us a fat that was harder and perhaps whiter. A consumer might notice a difference in the fat quality, especially if they're used to corn-fed pigs. However, when this has been looked at, substituting wheat for corn, and here they had 87% wheat as a substitution for 80% corn. In this experiment, these diets were fed throughout the finishing period. These pigs were marketed at about 150 kilograms body weight, and they saw no effect of diet on carcass characteristics, on the pork fat composition, so that's the fatty acid composition of the fat, or color of the fat. So the bottom line, formulating diets with wheat, what are some things we need to remember? When we are using alternative ingredients, so if we're moving away from strictly corn, soybean meal-based diets, and allowing alternative ingredients such as wheat byproducts, maybe peas, to come into our diets, it's even more important that we use the net energy system. We need to be able to put an accurate valuation on the energy content of the diets of those ingredients. Similarly, we should be using standardized digestible amino acids, not total amino acids, and standardized total tract digestible or available phosphorus. Depending upon the cost of changing the diets, we may or we may not want to allow the net energy content to decrease as we increase the content of wheat or co-products to these diets. We should formulate, if we do allow the net energy content to decrease, we must formulate the diets then based on a nutrient to net energy ratio. And then that will allow the pig to consume more feed because of the lower energy content, and amino acid content will stay the same. So very often what we do is we formulate based on lysine to net energy ratio, and then the other amino acids are formulated as a ratio to lysine. This uses the assumption that the pigs will consume their diets to maintain a constant caloric intake. So we can expect feed efficiency to be reduced. I explain this better. This is an example from the NRC 2012 model, pigs growing from 100 to 135 kilograms body weight. So let's say the diet NE is 2475 kcals per kilogram. They're going to grow, they're going to gain 35 kilograms. Based on the model, these pigs would consume about 113 kilograms of feed. Gain per feed would be 0.311. Now let's say the diet energy content drops to 2,350 kcals. To maintain a constant caloric intake, these pigs would have to consume 118 kilograms of feed. So feed efficiency would drop to 0.295. So this assumes that pigs fed a diet with a lower energy content will consume more to maintain caloric intake, and thus we can expect feed efficiency to decrease. To accommodate this, one thing we do have to consider is, because these pigs have to eat more, is that we need to ensure, among other things, adequate feeder space. What about economics? Certainly the best is to use least cost formulation. As I showed in the current market, our diets are not, some of the wheat co-products are not even coming into our diets. This isn't really a typical situation. Or there are some online tools that allow us to decide what type of a value we could put on wheat based upon current prices of corn and soybean meal. So this gives us an estimation of the relative value of wheat based upon corn or soybean meal prices. Something I touched on, but I want to emphasize again, is especially if we're using co-products, we have to consider the potential for mycotoxins. When we're dealing with wheat, deoxynivalenol is not the only, but it's the mycotoxin we see the most, commonly called DON. It will concentrate in the co-products. So if you see it in the grains, you can expect the content of DON to be higher in most of the co-products. I recommend that you follow the current CFIA guidelines for purchasing and feeding contaminated feeds, and be aware that these guidelines are in the process of being changed. We expect the new guidelines out like any day now. So that's all I have to say. I hope I've added some tools to your toolbox about rebalancing rations in this area of corn root worms contaminating the corn crop. If you have any questions or comments, please email me, denise.beaulieu@usas.ca. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Denise, for that. Super informative and very educational. And so I really appreciate your time bringing that information to us today. And so thank you. And once again, before we sign off this on-demand video presentation, I'd just like to say once again, thank you to all our sponsors, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye for now.